Makes sense to finally round out the set of videos, the most okay job from each crystal. I think the only crystal that gave me some issue was the fire one, but I'll get to that. The wind crystal I think is monk pretty solidly because it obviously can't be the mages. It debatably could be thief if you think monk is worse, but I don't. And knight is just very good with good stats, good equipment selection, and good abilities. Water crystal, same thing, pretty much has to be a red mage because time mage, summoner, and mystic knight are all incredible jobs, and the berserker sucks. Even by itself, red mage is the biggest definition of okay job in the history of JRPGs. Earth crystal's dragoon because its competition is samurai. You tell me what you think of that. Although similar to the thief monk thing, some people do think that dragoon is worse than dancer, and there's definitely arguments to be made for that. This guy made a great point and made me realize that no job can get use out of equip lances because there's only one job that can equip both equip lances and jump that isn't dragoon. Mime. Maybe there's some kind of weird niche use for that, but I'm not wasting ability slots for that. But I'm sticking with dragoon because I still personally feel like dancer is worse. I value shields a lot in this game, so that leaves us with the fire crystal between Beastmaster and Ranger. But what it actually is between rapid fire and release/control. Both of these jobs are defined by their abilities rather than their stats or weapons or magic or whatever. So I did actually think about this for a while. I ultimately went with Beastmaster because rapid fire is one of the most iconic abilities from this game, so my choice went mostly based on feel rather than thinking how well rapid fire actually fits well into this team, or not fits well into this team. Rapid fire monk does sound like an interesting combination though, I'll say that. But just like everything else in this game, we can argue forever about job efficiency and whatnot, but ultimately it just comes down to personal preference. Starting out with monk though gave me some perspective on it. I don't think I've ever had monk in a 4-job fiesta before, and my experience with it in the main game is pretty limited even though I know it's a decent job. My experience is probably similar to most people's. You use it for most of World 1, and then it kind of falls off later once every other melee job starts doing better damage and being able to equip better armor. Notably, Build Up, or Focus, or whatever you want to call it, which is an ability I always dismissed as fun to use but kind of impractical, actually gives me a great boost early on where I actually do want to try and beat bosses before something happens in as few turns as possible. With Siren, I want to beat her before she goes undead and become super resistant to physicals, but I guess crits negate defense, I didn't know that. Against Magissa, it lets me destroy her before she can summon Forza. Especially against counter bosses like Garula, it lets me get counterattacked significantly less, although he does still wreck my shit because the monk's defenses leave a lot to be desired. Build-up falls off kinda hard after the initial few bosses, but that niche of being able to beat them before they can pull out some kind of gimmick is pretty nice. By the way, I got a comment asking if I could show some parts that aren't just the bosses, and usually I don't bother because this is what it looks like. I'll show non-boss things that are notable, but they don't happen very often. It's mostly just stuff like this, buying stuff from new stores, and spamming Fleef, the chicken knife. You're not missing much. Once we get Red Mage, we can pretty easily steamroll the next few bosses because this is where Red Mage is still good. You'd hope so, right? It'd be pretty bad if a job was terrible the instant you got it. It's too bad more stuff isn't weak to Thunder. Not counting Crayclaw, who's barely a boss, and any barrier change bosses like Melusine. I wonder how many Thunder weak bosses there are. Well, I guess there's Omega and his ilk, and Thundaga Spellblade is one of my favorite ways to clear that one pyramid room with all the mecha heads, but otherwise it feels like the most neglected of the 3 main spells. Maybe I should list all the bosses that are weak to the 3 elements. Maybe something like Blizzard actually becomes way less useful. The Dorm Chimera is actually more difficult than most bosses in World 1, even without being in a 4-job fiesta. We're going to be catching one of these guys for Sandworm, naturally, and any fight against the Chimera has the chance of insta-dying to 2 consecutive Aqua Breaths. So really this fight is just about getting completely lucky, which I eventually did, and then after that the Sandworm is no problem. Following one of the only Thunder weak bosses, we get to Adamantoise, who's pretty beefy in this run. We don't have any access to instant kills yet, and both his defense and magic defense are super high. Our Blizzaras are only doing half the damage they were doing the other element weak bosses. Although thinking about it, that's probably because he has innate protect and shell on top of his existing super high stats. At least any monk crits that will happen will punch through his insane defense, making him do a little damage with him being in the back row. This is definitely a fight I could have spammed protect for, but even though I'm talking about his high defense, I wasn't super concerned about this fight being difficult, just taking a little longer than most up to this point. Bahamut, despite having no elemental weakness, is still a pretty simple boss. Since we're still in the Red Mage is good part of the game, RL level black and white magic is more than enough to let us get through bosses with no lasting impact. On the subject of Monk, that job is probably going to get talked about the least throughout this run, since it's a very basic melee job. It doesn't really do anything fancy aside from hit things very hard. Chakra doesn't get used very much. Barehanded gets occasionally used just because there's a severe lack of good secondary abilities for the majority of the run until I master Beastmaster with everyone. Monk doesn't really do anything this run aside from being the item thrower, a trait shared with his Wind Crystal brother, the Thief. Unfortunately, my playstyle, being don't fight very much to farm fleas for the chicken knife, isn't very conducive to melee jobs because they rely on level for their damage way more than the mages do. It's my own fault, but it's kind of annoying nonetheless. A few days ago, the chicken knife versus Brave Blade video went up, and someone in the comments said that one of the better ways to farm fleas is to keep a monster chest available and just spam fleas there. No walking around in the overworld needed, which is a great idea. They also said that someone fleed maximum times in the chest in the starting town, and then made a save to use for any future runs because it both skips the intro and makes it so you never have to worry about chicken knife farming. That's a pretty great idea. I'll have to start doing something like that myself. Oh yeah, Soul Cannon is weak to Thunder too. Though this fight is annoying, as you'd expect, but since we do have red magic for hitting the Thunder weakness, and Cura to make us essentially unkillable from the percent damage laser attack, this is just another time waster fight. The launcher's olding one of my main damage dealers is pretty annoying, but at least it was just one of them. I could have restarted until they hit the Monk or Beastmaster, but if this fight is still more than doable with one red mage, then I'm not concerned about it at all. I forgot to write something for Archeoavis, so how about another round of games I've played recently and my recommendations. I recently did another co-op run through of Stranger of Paradise, and that game is still extremely fun. I never played Neo, which this game is apparently based on, but it definitely makes me want to try it out now. I mean, Strangers of Paradise is a job-based game, and considering what you're watching right now, that checks out. And I also love action RPGs. Kingdom Hearts 2 and the Tales series are some of my favorite games of all time. Also, the main character, Jack, is a surprisingly great character. Pre-release, he definitely got memed on for the whole I've gotta kill chaos thing, but the way the story plays out makes him and the overarching plot super engaging to watch. It helps that his voice actor, and I don't know how to pronounce it, but it looks like Motion Melvin, totally fits the role perfectly. Apparently he mostly did documentary type stuff, and I can definitely see his voice fitting there.
Chaos reigns.
If you ever get a chance, I seriously recommend it, especially multiplayer. If they ever make another Dissidia, catch me co-maining Jack and Squall all the way. But as a warning, stay away from the DLC, that's significantly less fun, although the story is fairly interesting, so it might be worth watching a playthrough on YouTube or something. I made a YouTube post about this, but I played through Yeek after the 1.5 update came out in December, and I was actually keeping up with that update's development for quite a while. I was super ready for Axe Studios to make the plot of Yeek easier to understand and less clumsily written, to make another turn-based RPG that was actually fun, but they didn't do that. Do not recommend. However, the music is fantastic. I used some songs for the accessories video, just listen to this. The soundtrack is on Bandcamp. I'll try and remember to link it in the description. I mentioned the Tales series. I've been playing Tales of Xillia 2 on the hardest difficulty for the hell of it because that game definitely has a top 3 battle system in the series. Graces definitely still beats it out, and Vesperia is up there with it. And I'm sure that the Graces remaster is out by the time this video gets uploaded, so I'll heavily recommend that. But Xillia 2 is no slouch. 9 playable characters who all have vastly different playstyles, with a really engaging element and combo system, and a story that goes off the rails in extremely bizarre ways, and what I would consider one of the best bad endings in any video game ever made. Although the story is very fan-fiction-y, where the plot revolves around a new main character that all of the characters from the first game instantly love and become best friends with, and in that way it's actually way worse than Tales of Symphonia 2, the infamously terrible fanfiction sequel to the beloved Tales of Symphonia. Symphonia 2 might be a pretty bad game, but I can respect the fact that the main characters actually get into a lot of beef with the original cast. Wait, which game was I talking about? No, whatever, just play Tales of Graces. Have I even played anything else? I saw Off is getting an updated re-release. How about a quick overview of RPG Maker games I've played? Off has a great story, but the gameplay is pretty repetitive and dull. Eve is a fantastic game all around and definitely my favorite RPG Maker horror game. Pocket Mirror has god-tier art and a pretty interesting story. The fact that you can lock yourself out of the better endings incredibly easy is incredibly annoying, especially because you have to replay the entire game again. Yume Nikki goes without saying, that game is fantastic. Most people watching this video have probably played it to some extent themselves. If you haven't played Yume Nikki, it's free on Steam, go try it out. Mogeko Castle is one of the most bizarre and disturbing RPG makers I've ever played. Also, the endings I didn't find very satisfying. I'm honestly not sure if I'd recommend this one or not. Finally, Space Funeral is super great and weird, and I feel like I need more adjectives to describe it. But the game is like an hour long, so I say just download it if you've got an afternoon free. I hope that if you haven't played any of them and this video gets you to try one, that you enjoy them because the world needs more weird games. So you can technically get float in any 4-job Fiesta run. If you confuse these Gala cats, I don't know how to pronounce that, they'll eventually cast float on you, and if you control them, then you can just cast it on yourself directly. Apparently this is how control works, is that you're just given access to the enemy's confused attack list to eliminate the randomness. Or maybe it's the other way around, where they made the control list first, and then based the confused moveset around it. It's some chicken and the egg stuff, but the result is the same. But I say any 4-job Fiesta run because there's other ways to get confusion that's not from the white or red mage, namely the Dancing Dagger's Confusion Dance and casting Confuse through the Wonder Rod. Obviously those two methods are far more annoying, but since the Dancing Dagger is a knife and 99.9% of 4-job Fiesta runs can use knives, then fights like Titan and Catastrophe are much easier if you're willing to go a bit out of the way. Although, I guess since you don't get those two weapons until after World 1, it doesn't make Titan a total cakewalk, but still, this is good stuff to know. Per Bolos, I casted full party magic on to get their health down so their self-destructs wouldn't obliterate me, but then I casted poison on all of them while I was waiting, and apparently if they die from poison, they don't do counter-based stuff. I don't even know why I did that. You know how long it takes for poison damage to tick down? Well, now you know if you didn't. I think this is probably one of the funniest moves in the game. Alright, right after starting World 2, this Gilgamesh fight immediately marks the point where Red Mage is not very good anymore. We hit him with the Ancient Sword early on, so his damage gets cut significantly, but this fight still takes a very long time. It's mostly because of him buffing himself, because my damage is already pretty bad, and the Protect Shell combo makes things take even longer. We're bringing in a Release monster, but it's just something that does a strong physical attack. I tried to use it right before he goes into Phase 2, because I wasn't sure if the Release monster's attack was affected by Protect. I'm just kind of assuming it is. I want to be in Phase 2 for as little as possible, and if the Shell Bear can help me do that, then I'll do whatever's necessary. It really sucks that Catch is the Mastery skill. It's totally deserved, because Catch is a top tier ability, but it would be so nice to have at least 2 people with Catch for annoying fights like this. Since Gilgamesh is so weak now, and we all have Protect, this fight really should be done, but sadly we're at the perfect spot where the mediocrity really shines through. This is the hardest Gilgamesh fight, combined with none of the fancy new stuff that we'll be getting throughout World 2, also combined with our party's low stats across the board. It's just a perfect storm, but things will get better from here. Thank goodness that the Red Mage can equip swords. The Ancient Sword and Sleep Sword are godsends for runs like these. You know what's interesting? How they give you the Carnago Gourd and Hypno Crown, two Beastmaster-centric pieces of equipment, extremely close to each other around the midpoint of the game, where you're probably more likely to have control without grinding. Or maybe you're just experimenting more with capture because you've gotten all the jobs and you're just trying stuff out. My gripes with Beastmaster aside, this is very nice that it happens before the game is halfway over. It goes even further to push my frustration that the dancer equipment is in the Rift. Sorry to harp on this again, but the devs or designers or whoever clearly had the right ideas somewhere. I really feel like some design documents got mixed up or something. Hey, you know that one room with all the bookshelves where you have to put the books away? I've always wondered why I'm never able to remember where the books go, and it turns out the books are put in completely different places in the SNES and GBA versions. Project Demi has the bookshelf order be super wacky, I'm assuming because of translation weirdness? Someone who knows the original Japanese script would probably know, because I know literally nothing about how the Japanese language works. Either way, they made it much more sensical for GBA, which is appreciated. Anyways, I mentioned in the Blue Magic video that I think red dragons could be more difficult than some bosses. Well, look at this. You open a chest and your head gets bitten off. That doesn't happen in World 1. Actually, I guess it kind of does. Thank goodness Control is so overpowered. So for the sake of some kind of legitimacy, I guess, I'm opting to not grind over 400 ABP for each character to get catch, which leaves me in a bit of a dilemma fighting the crystals. This team is actually so mediocre, it lacks any kind of defining feature whatsoever. I mean, at least the worst jobs party had the Death Scythe and whatever weird thing Gaia wanted to do. The only even remote X factor here is Catch, which is the mastery ability for Beastmaster. Bad magic, bad physicals, no super interesting debuffs besides Old from the Ancient Sword, which leaves the question of how to best deal with these guys. I got the Fire Shield, so I at least have the last-ditch effort of getting the Fire Crystal down to low health and slowly whittling away the other crystals while I get healed with Faraga. I could do a Reflect Ring setup and get Float from some enemy, kill the Water Crystal before it kills me, and then I'm free to win. But one, that sounds really boring, and I don't think I'd be able to outdamage the Wind and Fire Crystal's healing. And they have 10,000 MP each, so that'd take forever. And two, I didn't grind for the rings for once because I'm sick of grinding for them, and this time it really bites me in the ass. So one of my plans is getting an enemy with instant death and getting probably the Water Crystal out of the way. Before that, I had another idea. I noticed an interesting release on the wiki's catch page from the Shield Dragon, that super dangerous thing in the temple with the 12 legendary weapons. First off, since it's not immune to control, that means that getting it is super easy, and grinding off them is similarly simple. They give a metric shit ton of experience for this point in the game. The next best encounters in the forest only give like a fourth of this, and the gil and ABP aren't too bad either. But I catch one, go to test it out to see the damage, and... what? Almagest is Holy Elemental? The crystals have a Holy immunity? What can you even do that's holy besides Almagest against these guys? You don't have Holy, Excalibur, the Holy Lance, what the hell? If these are supposed to be Galoof's world equivalent to Bartz's world's crystals, then why aren't we immune to Holy? What a load. I even tried the using one instant death enemy thing, but not only can you not choose a target, it wouldn't even work no matter how much I tried. The accuracy is probably insanely low. A comment informed me about how spell accuracy works, and basically, between deaths, probably low innate accuracy, and the 50 plus accuracy penalty I'm getting from being level 21, and these guys being level 77, there's probably a better chance of this death hitting myself than these guys. So one last look through the catch list, and I think I got it. The answer might lie with this guy, the Scourge of the Mughal Desert. Basically, no regular enemy is immune to control no matter how strong they are, or even if they're stronger than a boss. So let's try this guy on the crystals, and... hey, I can work with that. Just gotta time my turns better. The main thing is that I want to combine this with the Flame Shield strategy, so if the Maelstrom hits the fire one, I have to not kill it. Which, considering the rest of them can be hit by fire and aren't immune to it like Ice and Lightning, that should be fine to take out multiple at once. So let's just get the Wind Crystal down and... alright, I guess maybe some grinding is needed. I am only level 21 after all. Well, if the Dragoon had a more notable stat spread, I probably could have done this a few levels sooner. But we're back at level 27 with over 1000 health. Let's try again. Aw, for fuck's sake. Well, it's kinda lame that I did that for no reason, but I was probably gonna have to do it later anyway. Let's just move on. This fight took way too much brain power for how little issue it usually poses. You know what I find interesting is that this little spot right here is the closest place you can park the dragon before going into Exdeath's castle. It's gotta be deliberate for some reason that there isn't a spot right next to the entrance. I mean, the rest of the game is pretty deliberate about it in the overworld design, since you can have the dragon, both chocobos, and the airship to pilot, all with different rules about what they can and can't fly over, walk over, or land on, or whatever. Just a weird little thing I've always noticed. Anyways, we can use that maelstrom experiment as knowledge of how to get rid of this guy right away, and after jumping on Gilgamesh a few times, we finally move on to the main event. I finally did it. I broke down and started rod breaking. This fight was just too annoying for me. Although I was only able to rod break 3 times since you can only buy poison rods in World 2, and Exdeath is immune to bio for some reason. Why? I tried only grinding on the French statues to get catch for 2 characters, so I'd only have to drain half of his HP to make 2 blaze dragons kill him, but I couldn't even do that. I could have grinded even more to get dual cast and get twice as many protects up, but Exdeath was either too much for me, or I got several unlucky runs in a row. If it's not Earthshaker, it's Zombie Breath, or Vacuum Wave, or his Aga spells, or whatever other bullshit he wants to throw at me. If a party member goes down, or if everyone's health gets too low, that's basically the game right there. The party healing is just not good enough, even with high potions, to outlast the fight, because our overall damage is so bad and all over the place. I'm level 30 now, so I don't know if that's over or under leveled, but the physical damage dealers just aren't doing enough damage, and the Red Mage is the Red Mage, so I can't exactly rely on it either, but I can rely on it to rod break at least. I know there's never been a rule against rod breaking or guild toss, obviously that's self-inflicted, but the fact that even the worst job run could get through this fight, quote-unquote, legitimately, finally made me think that maybe mediocrity really is worse than bad. What a weird realization to have. By the time this fight was completed, it took several hours worth of attempts, a couple month-long break somewhere in between those attempts, and I'm just glad that the 3 rods I had were enough, and I didn't need to master Red Mage or Beastmaster with everyone just to progress. Truly a nightmare. I guess if it really came down to it, I could have just restarted the run and farmed for rods and reflect rings, but I just really didn't want to do that. On a mostly unrelated note, Exdeath's design is super interesting to me in Dissidia. Making him a slow-ass counter character is cool in terms of fighting game character design, but it doesn't really feel fitting to his character other than that he's a big dude in armor. I think in all the fights against him in Final Fantasy V, the only counter he ever does is dispel on you if you have buffs up sometimes. It kind of reminds me how in Fire Emblem, so many lords in the series are fast, hard-hitting sword fighters, which are fairly well represented in Smash, but then you have Ike. This is probably a poor comparison because my knowledge of Fire Emblem isn't great, but Ike feels like Generation 1 Mewtwo, where he might not be the best unit ever, but relative to the other units of the game he's in, he feels like one of the best units in the series. He's fast, hits like a freight train, gets an unlimited use unique sword. Said sword can also hit at range. He has a unique healing move that also does insane damage. He's basically got it all. And then in Smash, they made him the slow but strong archetype. And this feels similar to Exdeath. Exdeath is fast as hell in this game, fast enough that certain phases of his boss fights just have him attack twice per turn. And he has a multitude of insanely strong physicals and magic. I know Exdeath in Dissidia has moves that aren't counters, but his counter-based playstyle, I'm assuming, is why he's number 1 on this tier list I see on the Dissidia wiki. It's also hilarious to me that Bartz and Exdeath are on the polar opposite ends of said tier list. The way they did Bartz and Dissidia is so whack. I know he's somewhat different in NT, but like, why mimic? You took the character from the game that made the job system actually good, and your solution was just to make his moveset an amalgamation of the rest of the heroes? It just makes no sense. Wait a minute, Prish is number 2? I know Ultimecia is amazing, but I didn't know Prish was up there too. I also feel vindicated that Jekt is up here. I had a friend that actually knew how to use Jekt, and he would always destroy our friend group. I think I've gotten way off topic here. You know, I didn't realize until getting the second gold pin from the pyramid that in this party, only the Red Mage can equip it, which leaves more defense for the rest of them. I also grabbed the Thief Knife and stole some Reflect Rings finally, which have been sorely missed for this playthrough. You already know how this fight goes, but Focus comes back because it's one of those abilities that skips the chicken knife flee thing. Focus is way more practical than I expected going into this run, I gotta say. Plus, you know, it's just nice to see those big damage numbers. It's also notable in that this party can get use out of a lot of the legendary weapons. We can get the Assassin Dagger for some insta-kills, the Red Mage appreciates the Magus Rod and free revives from the Sage Staff, Fire Whip is, well, it could be worse I guess, and we theoretically could get the Holy Lance, but I'm getting the Dragon Lance later, and the Chicken Knife is our melee weapon of choice here, so I don't bother. But yeah, this is only notable because most of the time I only need 2 or 3 of the weapons. Same strategy here. I tried this fight with Bartz and Ferris having elf capes since they don't have shields, but they didn't activate, so I redid the fight with maximum haste. I still won the other fight, but I felt this one was more enjoyable to watch. Seeing a focused monk only do 1000 damage per hit is kinda depressing though. I know that Chicken Knife is a bad comparison point, but it's still demoralizing. I doubt the Kaiser Knuckles will be better than permanent haste, which doesn't help my feeling. So quick side note in case you don't know about this and get a rod character in your 4-drop Fiesta, and also assuming you're not using save states. With the magic pot, if he doesn't flee after your first elixir, just use the Wonder Rod as an item. It casts Return this way, which lets you infinitely retry until you can get the ABP for 1 elixir. Most people probably use this strategy for getting rare steals, like getting a 3rd gold pin from Gogo or getting the Dragon Whisker from Shinryu, but this is a really good use of it too. Since World 3 is where I throw all my notions about grinding out the window, I farmed for Gil for coral rings, as is the norm. In retrospect, I probably should have had at least the Beastmaster put on red instead of focus, just to speed it up a little, but you know, with the coral rings this fight is almost completely free. I at least have dual cast now for a couple characters, which I'll definitely be using later, but man, dual cast is like the most disappointing, exciting thing ever in a 4-job Fiesta. Since it obviously doesn't replace the red command outright, that actually means that other characters can do the Red Mage thing better than the Red Mage, because the Red Mage has to spend their whole second ability slot on dual cast, instead of having dual cast and something potentially useful. Because just in case you weren't aware, giving a character dual cast just straight up gives them the red spell list. The red command ceases to have any use whatsoever once you unlock it. I think that could be a neat buff to the Red Mage for any mod out there, and maybe there is one that does it, but for the base game, no such luck. Focus, Haste, and the Chicken Knife really make quick work of any boss. I dual cast to Protect in this fight because I honestly wasn't sure if Zantetsuken was considered a physical attack, but obviously it's not. Personally, I thought it could have gone either way, but at least the main damage dealers lived. I am furiously, unrelentlessly attacking in this fight, and Bahamut is not going to stop me. I mean, he almost stops me, because Maelstrom is pretty scary, but my offense is way too strong for him this time around. I'm using the Rune Blade with the Red Mage, and I'm honestly shocked how powerful it is. Obviously the damage numbers are inflated somewhat because of focus, but even halved, that's some seriously good damage for that job. It's one of those uses MP for crits, put magic in the damage formula weapons, and since Red Mage's stats are pretty decent, they can get good mileage out of it. I think this is the first time I've ever bothered to use the Rune Blade. Most physical attackers are usually using the Chicken Knife or a legendary weapon, and most magic users are using the Magus Rod or Sage Staff. I'll give it up this time. Something I don't really understand is the ending. He basically gives up and says, wait, I'm not dead yet? I'll just do it again. You know, the further I get into this run, the more I'm thinking that maybe Monk really is worse than Thief. Focus is really cool, but Thief does that whole stealing great items thing, and several of its abilities are really good, as opposed to the Monk's 1 or maybe 2. The job's damage is dropping off harder the further we go, which maybe that's partially because I'm underleveled, and the Monk does rely on levels way harder than most jobs, but no matter how you cut it, it just doesn't measure up to any of the other jobs in this run. Monk and Thief even both have Ignore Chicken Knife Flee AoE skill, so it's not like Monk has the edge there. Something to think about while we beat Calofisteri to death. As always, a Reflect Ring kinda neuters her AI. I can't believe she uses Regen and Cura. She has great support skills like Haste, Protect, and Shell, but they couldn't give her at least Curaga? Come on. Alright, for the record, I did an attempt at this fight where I tried using the Kaiser Knuckles, but Krill's damage output barely changed and she was still the worst of the 4, so I just redid it with Haste. If I'm not redoing the worst jobs run with a Monk, I can't go through Sword Dance hell again, man. I just can't. This is one of the more annoying Apanda fights I've had in a while. He might be weak to fire, but since he reacts to fire with toading someone, that means dual casting it makes him counter twice as much. At least dual casted Fira does decent damage, nowhere close to a Black Mage's boosted Firaga, but you gotta take what you can get with a lineup like this. Focusing with the Rune Blade might have done equivalent damage, but I wanted dual cast in case he started doing wind slashes, which he did do, so I'm determining that this was the correct choice of action. I've also accepted Monk's shortcomings at this point and have Krill on support duty, Ferris just fishing for whipped Firagas, which goes about as well as you'd think it would. But let's talk more about Monk for a second. What is up with its weapon selection? Or rather, the lack thereof. I mentioned in the weapon ranking video about how the Monk would have been cooler with Yang's fist weapons from Final Fantasy IV, and like, the more I think about it, yeah, why didn't they do that? We could talk about whether the Kaiser Knuckles should be an accessory or a weapon, but the Elemental Fist weapons would be awesome for a good chunk of bosses. Just in World 3, they'd kick the shit out of Apanda and Leviathan, and I guess regular enemies, I'm sure they'd do just as well. I would also suggest that they not have their own attack value, and purely focus on adding an element. The Elemental Bows are available really early, which I consider a bad thing because their damage gets outclassed super early, even with the double damage from weaknesses. Better yet, just let any weapon get use out of Spellblade. Sleep punching, silence punching, whatever. Maybe that's another thing I'd put in a theoretical balance patch. Here's my list so far. Mastering Red Mage replaces Red with dual cast. Give the Monk the Elemental Fist weapons. Actually, here's another one. Replace Thief's Steel with a Mug when their job gets mastered. Actually, maybe that's not a straight upgrade if you don't want to kill what you're stealing from. We'll say that's 2.5 things. Just like Apanda, this was a surprisingly annoying fight against Ajlamagia. It only took 2 tries, but I gave up on the first try after he flashed my whole party. Soon after, I realized I have no eye drops, and then he white-winded himself for 10,000 health. Mighty Guard is just way too good, man. The only offensive magic I rely on is the Firaga Whip, and that gets halved too. I also came to the realization that since Focus is ignoring the Chicken Knife Flea, it's probably also ignoring the Firagas from the Fire Whip. I definitely should have taken notice of that earlier, but between the awesome damage from the Chicken Knife, the Monk's continuing mediocrity, and the Red Mage's cool sword, it kinda got lost in all the commotion. Besides, between a double damage attack and an attack that occasionally does more than double damage, I don't think the damage is enough to make or break any boss fights. This fight does give me a good excuse to reflect on the Blue Magic video, which came out about a week ago as of this recording, and it was super cool to see other people's perspectives on some of the spells I was a little neglectful towards. Here's some examples in no particular order. By far, the most commented thing was all the variations of Mighty Guard throughout the series. Some have Protect, Shell, Haste, some have stuff like Regen and Re-Raise. One of them, I think the one from Tactics, gives a super wide variety of buffs but at complete random. The Limit Break mix from Riku in Final Fantasy X was particularly crazy. Lots of stuff, so thanks for all the info. Someone said that Doom was a neat strategy for killing the non-heavy part of Neo Exdeath at the same time as another part to avoid his phase where he starts attacking twice per turn at one part left, which actually was a use case I considered but sounded way too niche to be believable. I also don't think I would bother doing this in a 4-job Fiesta with Blue Mage because the other summons past Zantetsuken are so good, but that is a legitimate use. Other fractional damage spells like Missile can be good if you get a 4-job Fiesta run where you can get any job at any crystal, because if you, for example, get Blue Mage as your Fire or Earth Crystal job, then you can't get Deathclaw at the Castle Escape because you obviously won't have learning for it. Also, I did mention this in the video, but to reiterate, level 4 Giga being multi-target is a legitimate upside over Deathclaw. It just won't come into play very often because, you know, enemies aren't super strong in 5. A lot of enemies in World 3 have levels divisible by 3, so level 3 Flare gets a ton of practical use, especially if you give blue to a Black Mage or Summoner. Question marks is one of the best ways to kill the Skull Eater in Jackal Cave because the MP cost is like 1/10 that of 1000 needles. My go-to for the Skull Eater is usually either hope it runs away or hope I roll Stalactite from Gaia, which are not the most reliable strategies ever. And finally, that thing I said about roulette and 4 bone mails is actually plausible because I forgot you could steal more of them from the necromancers in the final dungeon. That's just what's so special about blue magic, the versatility is off the charts, there's always something to learn. Remember that float trick that I used for Titan? Well, I did it again, and things go as expected from there. I've got access to frog magic. I'm going in as frogs against Halicarnassus to get a free turn. Thanks, Red Mage, for once. I accidentally left the Reflect Ring on Ferris, but I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't really care and it didn't matter. We'll just say it was insurance in case he got to his holy phase. One thing in this fight that did take me by surprise though, I knew he was vulnerable to Mini, but I've never actually seen it happen before. I was stunned that it not only worked, but worked first try. Mini sets your defense to 0, meaning that everyone could wail on him even more. But depressingly enough, the monk's damage doesn't change very much. I guess Lena wasn't focusing like the others were, but like, come on, I want to see quadruple digit damage on regular attacks. Whatever. This fight went exceedingly well, way better than it had any right to. Also, apparently this happens with many enemies that have the boss death effect. Interesting. This fight was super fun and super satisfying to do. Twintania gets a pretty beefy hit on me to start, but that will be his last as I abuse his counter-heavy nature right after. According to the Final Fantasy wiki, Twintania's chance of counterattacks is 1/3, but it's always felt like a lot more than that to me. However, for once, this actually works in my favor, because as you can see, the counter to magic attacks is Mega Flare, an easily reflectable attack that does nearly 5,000 damage. If I had bothered to grind out dual cast for every character, this would have gone even faster, but as the fight goes, it was super fun to watch Twintania shred his own HP down like this. He has 50,000 HP, so I'm gonna do the math and see what the ratio of my own damage was to his reflected Mega Flares. There were a couple of Mega Flare counters in there that were counters to his own attack being reflected at him. It's so good to see a counter boss be destroyed in this way. My original plan was just to survive until the charging form and try to cheese for an assassin dagger kill, but I like this idea way more. This strategy, with giant air quotes, is basically what I did to Necrophobe in my 4-job Fiesta run from 2020, where I also had a Dragoon and a Beastmaster. I realize now that this strategy is not very good, because Giga Flare does surprisingly poor damage, but combined with the Magic Lamp kicking ass with the Magic Rod, it was more than enough. However, I also wasn't really planning on what to do after, because I didn't think this would be a first try. I fumble around in the menus a lot trying to think of what I should do. Eventually I settle on having the monk go back to the classics of jumping around, which does way better damage than I thought it would. I guess I should have been doing Holy Lance jump the whole time instead of chicken knife focus. However, they both take 2 turns, pretty much, and Dragoon in midair is untargetable, meaning the frailer party members take a lot more hits. So really, I think both of them could be applicable depending on your preference or party setup. But yeah, Necrophobe gets jumped on a bunch to his death. Incidentally, I'm sure you've noticed that I've switched to having no game sound. I was getting sick of listening to the Final Fantasy V boss theme at various speeds, and I'm curious what you guys think. I wish I had like an action replay code for SNES and GBA that just let me turn the music off so I could at least keep the sound effects while replacing the music. That was one of my favorite parts of editing the level 1 run. I'm also running out of music ideas for the tier list type videos. I've been trying to avoid basic stuff, you know, stuff that you hear in every Nintendo game reviewer video like Mario and Sonic and Zelda. But even then I'm failing there because one of the videos had only Kirby music. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that have great music suggestions and are way more versed in that stuff than I am, so please share your knowledge with me so that I may become more cultured. I'm off to farm for a Dragon's Whisker and Dragon's Lance. Well, we've grinded several levels later, up to level 42, and I'm pretty sure I've exterminated the Iron Giant population. I've even got the Goliath tonics to prove it. The Dragon Whisker I stole by doing that steal then return with the Wonder Rod if you don't get it thing, and it only took 2 tries, surprised the hell out of me. The Dragon Lance took a lot longer. I kinda stopped counting after 10, however, the Crystal Dragon is the first encounter after a quick load, and the common steal is elixirs, so I was actually okay with that one taking a while. So, I'm putting all my eggs into this catch and release basket, so you'll see what I've got once we get to Neo Exdeath. Doing things this way means I probably didn't have to grind as much as I did, but this run has been extremely long and extremely taxing on my brain for the wrong reasons, so I won't argue if people tell me what I should have done differently. I'm very aware that this run stopped being optimal a long time ago. Also, Exdeath has it fucking out for Krill in this fight. She gets the lion's share of white holes, then obliterates her with Holy. Eventually, Exdeath realizes who the support character is and nukes Bartz out of existence with Flare. But man, this first phase was pretty annoying, having to waste so many turns bringing Krill back up to speed. We've got Mighty Guard and 3 Blazes coming up. I'm fairly sure that going all in with the upfront damage like this is my best chance of killing everything as fast as possible. And the shell from Mighty Guard means I'll at least survive one Almagest, and hopefully not get wiped in the meantime. Mighty Guard could help in the first phase, but I only have the one. White Hole could undo that in an instant, and the only Petrify immunity I've got is the Aegis Shield, since obviously no one can equip ribbons. The Mighty Guard capture is pretty interesting. It's from the Crystal in this dungeon, which I'm pretty sure you can only catch with the Cornago Gourd and Excalibur, since it has a whopping 3 health to work with. So thanks again, Red Mage, for being able to equip swords. I'm pretty sure Mighty Guard makes this fight even remotely possible, because man does Neo Exdeath not stop in this fight. I originally rolled in with 4 Blaze Dragons, but I was never able to get past the Almagest section before it destroyed my party. So in this case, survivability was way better here. Unfortunately, while I can mitigate the damage from Almagest, Grand Cross kinda screws me over. Ferris and Krill make it out fine, but it olds both Bartz and Lena. Honestly, Lena I'm not too concerned over, even if her occasional crits were super nice. But Bartz being olded makes my grinding for the Dragon Whisker completely pointless. I mean, he spends 99% of the fight throwing up protects and high potions, so it was never going to be a main strategy, but like, whoever gets the Dragon Whisker? Come on. But this fight does otherwise go as you'd expect. Go through the Magic Lamp summons, target Almagest, try and kill the last 2 parts around the same time so I don't get killed by his double turns. A few runs ago I said that one of my main strategies in this fight was to do Zantetsuken last, so there was no risk of that double turn thing happening. But the party damage from the Magus Rod boost is kinda too nice to pass up, and Earthen Wall is just, you know, extremely good. A big problem arrived when Exdeath started dispelling people. I honestly completely forgot he could do that, and removing Shell is a really big problem. The bright side there is that he only started doing that after Almagest was gone, and that is the biggest magic problem in this fight, but it definitely scared the shit out of me. Finally, I brought up the Dragon Whisker because the top left part of Neo Exdeath is a dragon for some reason. I wanted the Beastmaster and Dragoon to both go ham on it once it was the last of the 2 segments left, but I had to leave it all to the Dragoon. Very glad you get those weapons just in time to where they're the most useful, even if it is only for 1/4 of the final boss. I almost wish I had kept focused to see the super high damage against that part, but I think I would have been screwed for the rest of the fight. While the rest of the fight plays out, here's my thoughts on this party. Man, these guys suck. This run went through all 3 sides of the 2-sided coin. The Monk played about how I expected, doing great early game and falling off and having to rely on crits late game, mostly being an item thrower. Similarly, Beastmaster being unremarkable except for catch and release being the game changer was another thing I expected. The curveballs came from Dragoon and Red Mage, weirdly enough. I've never played a physical Red Mage with a Rune Blade before. I am legitimately shocked at how high the damage output was. Obviously it's low compared to actually good jobs, but it's cool that the Red Mage's stats are all just good enough to use a weapon like that and not die super fast. Dragoon I guess wasn't really a surprise that it was the main damage dealer, well with the highest strength of the 4, but combined with focus for no fleeing, Dragoon really was a force to be reckoned with. But to answer the question from the title, Maybe? Befitting of the most mediocre job lineup, there's way less cheese factor and less highs and lows. The worst jobs had really early instant death access, and Sword Dance was always a one-turn max damage attack after a certain point. But these jobs were in a straight line through the whole adventure. No fights where they particularly struggled, aside from all the Exdeath fights, obviously. None where they excelled, no all-or-nothing gambles like Dance. It just was a run. I'm sure at least some of you must be thinking, hey, Beastmaster can't be in a mediocre job run, Catch and Control are way too strong. Ranger should have been the Fire Crystal job. And yeah, you may be right about that, so stay tuned. But for now, see ya.